Now let's get started. This is something that I get a lot of questions on. I talk with a lot of people on. There's a ton of misinformation out there about bears, what bullets require, the construction, the anatomy of the animal, etc. And we're going to be diving into all that so you have a better understanding and can be more effective in the field. Real quick though, I want to give a shout out to my buddy Jim. Made this shirt for me custom. Now naturally he had to do it in pink, well, this is him, so you can tell he's really in touch with himself and his feminine side. No, great guy. I actually sent him this mug, which is probably what inspired this, but great guy. I really appreciate it, Jim. Love the shirt, wear it all the time. Get a lot of compliments and questions on it. All right, let's dive into anatomy. Now, anatomy is one of the most misunderstood parts of bears, period. There's a lot of misconceptions out there as far as the construction of them, depths of vitals, bones, etc. And we're going to dive into all that. Real quick, though, I just want to cover vitals, depths, chest, etc., just to get that out of the way, and we'll start there. Now, as always, I have my beautiful artwork just because everybody loves it, and it's amazing. So, up top, we have a black bear. Now, for this video, I'm doing black bear, grizzly bear, and brown bear. That way, I'm covering the most common bears hunted. I could do polar and all that, but quite honestly, this will give you a good enough idea. Now, do they vary in weight? Yes, and I've talked about it a million times. Weight is irrelevant. The depth of penetration through is what counts. All the rest is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if it's 8 feet tall and, 1,500 pounds, or if it's 5 feet tall and 300 pounds. The depth of penetration is what's going to matter. That straight line the bullet's going through. Now let's start off with the black bear. They range anywhere between 125 pounds to 400 on average. That's going to depend on location, time of the year. Are they getting ready for hibernation, or are they coming out in the spring from hibernation and they're really skinny? Age, etc. is going to play a part in that. The maximum they can reach is around 650 pounds. That's, not a common weight. But let's look at this, and this is based off the bigger boys. Now, our depth to vitals is how far that projectile has to travel from the initial hit on the hide until it hits the vital organs inside the chest cavity. Now, with a black bear, we're only having 3.5 inches. So nothing astronomical. Now, as you can see, it's not a lot. 3.5 inches is not much. Now, this next one is 13 inches, and that is our vital depth. So that is the depth once we hit the vitals until we've reached the other side. So that's really what we need. A lot of people don't understand, once that projectile exits the other side and goes through those vitals, whatever's after that, all the energy potential that's still there when it passes through is a waste, because it still has it, and once it gets on the outside, on the other side, once you're through those vitals, it's irrelevant. It's not going to aid you in anything. Now, let's get down to a grizzly here. Now, a grizzly will run between 330 pounds and 850 pounds. Again, that's going to vary depending on location, what time of the year, etc., how old the animal is. Now, on this one, and this is something a lot of people are going to find weird, is our depth to vitals is only 4 inches. So we're only dealing between a black bear and a grizzly, a 1/2 inch difference of our depth to vitals. 3.5, 4. That's it. Your depth to vitals between a grizzly bear and a black bear, even though there's a weight difference, is only 1/2 inch. Our depth of vitals on the grizzly is 16 inches versus the 13 on a black bear. So we're only seeing an increase of 3 inches. I mean, it's nothing crazy. So the difference between a black bear and a grizzly bear for depth of penetration total, and that is your depth to vitals plus your vital depth, is only 3.5 inches. That's the difference between it. There's nothing crazy. I mean, really, it's not. Now, let's get down to the brown bear. Now, the Alaskan brown bear is a big boy. We're looking 286 pounds up to 1,540 pounds. So again, that's dominating both these bears. However, again, there's not a drastic increase, because if you actually look at it, we're only looking our depth to vitals of 4 3/4 or 4.75 inches. So over a grizzly, you got a 3/4 of an inch. That's it. Now, our depth of vitals is 20 inches. So we're only 4 inches more than a grizzly. Now, if we look at the total of all of these, between all of these combined, our depth to vitals, the difference between the biggest and the smallest is only 1.25 inches or 1 1/4 inches. Nothing crazy. And again, that's here. That's our depth to vitals. So the difference between you shooting a giant Alaskan brown bear and a black bear, just over an inch. That's it. That's all you got to achieve, is that little bit more. Now, if we go to our vital depths across the board, the total is only a difference of 7 inches. So from the smaller black bear to the huge brown bear, you're only dealing with a total of 7 inches difference of vital. Now, total of all that, of your depth to vitals and your vital depth, between the largest 1,500 pound bear in Alaska, on the brown bear, to the black bear, you're only looking at 8 1/4 inches. Seriously, that's it. If you look from here to here, that's all you got for a black bear. Depth of vitals from there to there. You can see when it's on a chart, it's nothing astronomical. It's nothing crazy. You're talking matter of inches. Now, a giant misconception too is of the hide itself. Now, people think because of the weight of both the hair and the size of the animal that it's super thick. There's not a lot of difference between the hides, actually. That's a common misconception. It goes for everything from elk, etc. They think just because it's larger and heavier, because it's got more mass across, that it's going to be so much thicker. It's really not. You're not dealing with a lot of thickness difference. Just like the size of the animal might vary, it might be taller and it might be slightly wider, and that's where it's getting its weight, is just mainly that length. If it stands up, that length of the body is just so much larger. But your depth of penetration, you're not looking at crazy differences. Same thing with hide. Now, is a brown bear hide that was from a 1,500 pound animal going to be much larger and heavier? Yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your depth of penetration is going to change drastically. Now, bears in general are a very low impact resistant animal. And what I mean by that is that bullet's not meeting a lot of impact resistance. They are fat, they're greasy, especially if you're hunting them in the fall. So what you're encountering is a thinner hide. There's a lot of hair, but again, that hair is really not going to affect that projectile. So you're going through a thin hide, and then you're getting into greasy fat and meat. And that grease is going to act like a lubricant. It's not going to give you a whole lot of resistance. That projectile is going to go through. If anything, it's going to be counterproductive of your expansion. It's not going to aid you. Okay, now we're going to dive into those myths I talked about, that misinformation, both on the animal and the projectiles. Now, something a lot of people don't realize is, like I talked about just a second ago, is anatomy-wise, bears don't require a whole lot of depth of penetration. The hair has an illusion of making it look much larger. And then you get the fact of a standing up bear versus one that's crouched down. I mean, even you as a human, when you're standing, you're going to look much skinnier than if you're bent over like this and everything's drooping like your stomach. And so when they're on all fours, they're going to appear much fatter. When they stand up, it's going to stretch out a little bit. Depending on how your shot is, if it's standing forward just like a human, or you're sitting it through the side, double lung shot, whatever you want to do, it's actually much smaller than what it appears. I mean, again, look at the size compared to a human. You know, it's very deceptive. You can see the hide is very thin there. It's not really thick, and the body itself is much smaller. Now, growing up in places like Idaho and Montana, it's something, if you're up from Alaska, you're going to see this all the time. Don't believe me, call Fish and Game to see how often it happens. People are going to find bones, whether it's the hand or whatever, and they're going to think it's a human. Bears are scary when it comes to how much they are like a human when you see the anatomy of it. Between the hands, and law enforcement has to be trained to tell the difference between, so they know whether it's a bear carcass that's been dumped or it's a human being. But I remember as a kid all the time, my buddy's dad was Fish and Game, and he got calls all the time to go identify whether it was a bear or not. Or, you know, somebody would come from places like California and they'd call the cops and say, hey, there's this camp up here and there's a dead body hanging in it. Really, it was just a bear. And so very similar to humans as far as the anatomy. Now, one of the biggest issues is bullets. Bullets, 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 and cartridges. Now, I know a lot of places recommend magnums. The reason for that is the client base that's usually coming to a guided hunt is not a very skilled shot or hunter. They don't really know how, and that's a big problem. So guides tend to recommend larger cartridges to try to aid in that. The problem is that's actually counterproductive in a lot of ways. One, if they're using the same crappy bullet, it's going to give them the same crappy results. They're just trying to increase mass. And if that bullet's not performing, it's not giving you any forgiveness. The other thing with magnums is recoil. If that person's already a poor shot and you're adding recoil, it's only going to increase their lack of fundamentals and increase the probability of a bad shot. So it's not really aiding you on any front, which draws me into this, and that's something people don't realize, is with bears being a low impact resistant animal, and people all the time tell me, oh, well, it's got thick bones, it's dangerous game. Is it dangerous? Yes, but that doesn't mean anything. They're not armored. They don't have these giant bones. That's something people like to say. I hear with elk and deer all the time. Oh, well, that would work on a white-tailed deer, but an elk has that thick shoulder, those thick bones. Here's an elk versus a deer shoulder. That's a white-tailed deer versus an elk. We're talking a difference of 1/10 of an inch. That's it. Seriously, 1/10 of an inch. That's all the difference in the bones there. If you look at this is a white-tailed deer, and you can see it's very, very thin on that. If you look here, you can see that's an elk. Once you trim the ribs, there's not a lot of difference in the depth of penetration, even in the ribs. And you can see those ribs are more flat. They're not round. People have this cartoonage theory that they are just these round things. Ribs are not like that. So what the problem is whether it's a magnum or not, and this is kind of why people go with the larger cartridges for bears, is they're using bullets that are quote unquote designed for dangerous game, for like Africa, where you have a high impact resistant animal and it needs to penetrate a long distance. In bears, however, being a low impact resistant animal, what happens when you use those projectiles, those solids or those thick bonded lead core bullets, is that bullet is not meeting the necessary impact resistance, and so it's simply penciling through because it's not meeting that resistance, or it's barely expanding, and so you're not really getting any good wounding. And so people will shoot it with that bullet thinking, oh, these bears are tough, they're built like a tank, they're dangerous animals, and they just blow straight through. And so what do they do? Oh, well, it obviously was the cartridge. The cartridge was too small, the caliber was too small. So they go with the bigger one. And all they're doing it with the same bullet is the same type of performance. The only difference is they're just getting a larger diameter. So they're increasing that wound size, that permanent wound cavity, just based on diameter. And what they do is keep doing that until they're getting better results, I would call it, but it's not really. I'm going to put the link in the description below to a video I did, and it was showing that a .223 with a good bullet can actually outperform, and even a 6 Creedmoor, a 50 cal. So I ran a 50 cal, this one right here, 750 grain AMAX match, against a .223 running a 69 grain tipped Match King, and then a 6 Creedmoor running a 110 A tip. And with those smaller cartridges, I was actually able to get a better transition of energy and a larger permanent wound cavity. And so effectively all you're doing, and this is one of the largest shoulder fire cartridges, but when you start getting into 300s and 338s and you're still using that bullet, you're not getting transition of energy. You're not getting hydrostatic shock or hydraulic shock. You're not getting that major dump, even at high velocity. And so that smaller cartridge with a better bullet is actually going to expand and give you a larger diameter, crushing more tissue, creating better wounding and more energy dump, and putting that animal down faster. But a lot of people don't realize that. I've changed a lot of people's minds on this, and they found more effective. A lot of these guys now that were doing 338s and 300s are switching to 308, 6.5 Creedmoor, 6 Creedmoor, etc., and just picking better bullets, and they're being more successful in the field. So you don't need anything crazy. Going with a bullet like Berger Hybrids, TMKs, A-tips, ELD match, what a lot of people call is a frangible bullet. It's a thinner jacket bullet. It needs less impact resistance. It's something we love at long range because it's going to open up more. But that projectile is going to give you far superior performance in a smaller cartridge. And again, recoil sensitivity is a real thing. So if that client or that individual can't handle recoil and they're already having issues shooting, increasing that recoil is going to be counterproductive. So getting them on a cartridge that they can handle well, make good shot placement, and pick a good bullet, which is not only going to give them better performance, but it's going to give them more forgiveness, is going to aid better in them being effective as a hunter on bear. Which brings us to caliber / cartridge selection and bullet selection for bears. Now, I already talked about those options. Those options are going to give you the best type of performance you can. This one's from a buddy of mine. It's with a 6.5 Creedmoor. That was a neck shot, 20 yards. So people say, oh, well, it's not going to work close range or whatever. Opening up, dropping on the spot. You can see there was major damage to that neck. Dropped dead on the spot, good sized bear. And something I want to point out, because a lot of people are going to try to argue, they're tough, they're this, they're that. This is him on a bear. Now, you saw that bear ran off. Here's the thing. He's using a 40-pound recurved bow with just a standard 2-blade. I mean, he's doing it as old school as possible. That all 5 of these bears were taken with that bow. That's a 40-pound draw, and that arrow is going 150 feet per second. Now, to put that in perspective, my compound bow with a 70-pound draw is pushing my arrows with new modern mechanical tips at 400 feet per second. If he can do it with the lesser, with significantly slower, and it's going to blow through that bear, then a bullet going 2,000-3,000 feet per second is going to blow through. Think about it. You're not dealing with a high impact resistant animal. You're not dealing with a lot of penetration. People kill them with bows all the time, modern and recurve. Fred Bear used to go at them with long bows and all kinds of stuff, and he would put them down, from the largest to the smallest. You really don't need a large cartridge. You don't need a 300. You don't need a 338. You really don't. That's a misconception, even at long range. Now, a lot of these guys are running 6.5 Creedmoors, 308s, and they're running bullets like the ELD match, 140 grains, 168 grains. And here's 2 bears.
Dumped him.
And you can see that it's dropping dead on the spot. They anchored them, good shot placement, and they're tumbling and going down. It's just, you don't need anything major. And a lot of people get that mixed up. They think, oh, I have to go big, I have to go big. If you look, just at dangerous game period, let's take a mountain lion. Now, a mountain lion, just like a bear, it's a dangerous game. It's a predator. It can kill you. However, if you look at the size of a mountain lion, your depth of penetration, height, etc., is very similar to a white-tailed deer. So 2 completely different animals. However, what the bullet's going to do in there, the impact resistant bones, etc., it's very similar to a whitetail. So if you're killing a whitetail, you have no problem killing that mountain lion. Bears, again, just because an animal is dangerous does not mean that you need a tough constructed bullet. It's actually going to be highly counterproductive. And so instead of focusing on trying to go large and go with a bonded bullet or a copper bullet that's going to give you piss poor performance and is just going to pencil through unless you happen to shut down the CNS by, hitting the high shoulder shot and impacting where those signals to the brain go through, hitting it in the neck or hitting it in the head, you're not getting any benefit from those type of bullets. It's counterproductive. You're going to have to go with higher velocities. You're going to have to go with a larger cartridge in order to get better performance, instead of going with a bullet that is going to give you better performance on those low impact resistant shots, not only at close range, but at long range also. Now, based off field results, that's actually hunting and ballistic gel tests, the top ones are the Berger hybrids, which is all Bergers except for the VLD line, which isn't very good. I've done a video on that. Now, don't get me wrong, because people are going to say, oh, well, I've killed with it. All bullets kill. It doesn't even matter. We're not talking about if it dies. We're talking about how effectively it kills. The difference between dropping on the spot or running off and expiring much later. So the Berger hybrids, again, it's just a hybrid design. They look like this. There's actually a cavity in the nose of the bullet. And so what happens with that thin jacket in that cavity is it's not going to clog like a typical, like the VLD, where it's just a hole through there. The lead goes all the way up and it can clog and effectively turn into a full metal jacket, or with the copper projectile where it's going to clog and do the same thing. With bullets, like the hybrids, it's got that massive cavity. What's going to happen is upon impact, that nose is going to collapse in force and reliable expansion, but you still have that small hole there. That way, when you shoot, you're not losing in on BC or, any of your external ballistics, but you're still getting that reliable ballistics on the terminal side where that collapses and opens up massively. The Sierra TMK, which is the tipped Match King, is another phenomenal one. It's got a much larger polymer tip than like the ELD Match. It's going to do a phenomenal job on that animal. Also, it's another thin jacketed ballistic tip video. There's controversy over the ballistic tips. A lot of people think that they're gimmicks. Not at all. They work extremely well. It gives you a larger opening, a larger hollow point that it fills. So you're still having your ballistic coefficient, you're still having your good aerodynamics, but you also have a larger hole on impact that is going to be forced backwards like a wedge, forcing expansion. Now, we also other ones. Now, AMAX they really only make now for the 308, but if you run that, the ELD Match is simply just an improved version. So if you can get the AMAX and you want to run those in your 308 or your 300, whatever 30 cal you have, AMAX, ELD Match, and Hornady A tips are also phenomenal. So those are the bullets that I recommend. Those are the top performers in both controlled testing and the field, and they will do amazing things for you. So you can get good terminal performance and not have to worry about going after a dangerous animal that you just wounded because you didn't get good bullet performance. These are going to give you shot forgiveness. Again, everybody talks about shot placement. That's all good and dandy. You might be able to place it exactly where you want, and I can, but this is addressed at everybody, and not everybody's a cracked shot. And even some cracked shots, when you start throwing in hunting and you get adrenaline going, it can all fall apart. I know guys that can drill tacks on a target all day, and then they're just everywhere on an animal. They'll miss even. So it's one of those things that, you don't need massive cartridges. Forget all that nonsense. And I've actually been glad. I've actually seen a shift in some guides of recommending your bullet choice and doing better bullets like these that I recommended, the Bergers, etc., for bears and other animals, instead of trying to recommend cartridges. All right, now let's talk shot placement. Now, I know this is going to come up because it always does, and that has to do with the shot placement 2 videos I showed, talking about 6.5 Creedmoors and 308s. Those guys that sent me those videos are friends of mine, and quite honestly, they kill a ton of bears. And they were that same Magnum kind of person. They've now switched, and now they're being more effective. So having used both, they'll never go back. They took that advice, implemented it, and now they're just getting better results. They're not tracking as much. They're not having to deal with any of that. But the thing that comes up is people are, oh, well, that was a spine shot, so it doesn't matter. Well, any high shoulder shot, you can impact the spine. That's kind of the point. But that also shows you why it's even better, because a lot of people don't realize is if you shoot it just behind here, all you're doing is you're impacting possibly ribs. You can impact both sides without ever touching a rib. So that's going to decrease your impact resistance and expansion. But even if you impact the ribs, there's a lot of dead space in there. People don't realize that. The chest cavity is not a solid block. You have your lungs, which you're going to have fluid in the chest cavity, but you also have a lot of dead space. Those lungs are full of air, and so you're not penetrating a whole heck of a lot. People don't realize it. Once you're in that chest cavity, you're not meeting a whole lot of resistance. So your main resistance is that few inches of that initial getting into the chest cavity. Once it's in the chest cavity, you're not meeting a lot. However, with the high shoulder shot, if you're getting the top part of that high shoulder, you're actually impacting more bones because you have the shoulder you're going to impact. You possibly have a rib to impact if you're doing the lower side, and then it's going through, hitting the other side, rib, shoulder. If you get that higher part, however, you're actually impacting through that spine. And so you're getting shoulder, shoulder meat, hide, and then it's going through and hitting that spine and then going out the other side if it does exit and hitting that other shoulder. And so you're actually increasing the amount of bones that you're going to impact. Now, if you look at those shots though, they were high shoulder shots. They were on the top. A lot of people, again, try to argue, if you do a high shoulder shot, it's going to impact the spine if you're on that upper part of that. There is a little bit on below that it's not going to impact it. People don't realize, just like with a deer, it dips down a little bit on that spine. It doesn't run along the top. That's just, protection. It's going to run more towards the center. And so it's a strange thing for people. They try to discount these bullets just because both of those happen to impact spine. But guess what? It worked. It shut down that CNS. It went through all that increased impact resistance, which is probably the most impact resistant shot you can take on a bear, and still performed beautifully at two different distances. There's no issue with it going through all that and dropping that animal. So don't be afraid to use match bullets. Don't be afraid of any of that. It works extremely well. Now, as far as shot placement, you have several different options. You can do the neck, which on any animal is kind of difficult, and if you don't get it right, it can turn out really wrong just because, you're trying to guess exactly where it is. Now, if you have a good bullet like this, it's going to open up and that temporary wound cavity will aid you. If it's a penciling bullet that doesn't have good performance, it's not going to aid you at all. And so it's going to result more in a wounded animal. A lot of times it's going to have enough energy to temporarily knock it out, and then it'll get right back up. But with a good bullet, yielding match, etc., TMKs, you're going to have that temporary wound cavity. You're going to have that tissue damage. It's going to aid you in putting that animal down and a lot of blood loss. You can do it in the head. Again, you want to know anatomy. Headshots can be tricky just because you're dealing with a hard surface. It's rounded. You can get ricochets depending on angles, stuff like that. And you want to make sure that it's actually going to go where you need it. You have behind the shoulder, or quote unquote behind the shoulder. Now, you actually want to shift slightly forward, more in line with the legs, just because, again, those vitals are forward. Or if you're quartering, making sure that you're aiming for where your exit hole could potentially be. And then, of course, you have the high shoulder. Now, high shoulder is the one I recommend the most. But again, just like with the neck shot or any other shot, it can be very deceiving just because the fur is large, it's long, especially when they're going into hibernation. When they're coming out, it's a little different. If you want to see what a bear looks like without its fur, yeah. So it's not as large as you think, but when they have that nice, beautiful coat, it's going to be a lot thicker. And so it's going to be deceiving on where you're placing it. But high shoulder shot is the shot I recommend. Worst case scenario, you hit the bottom part of that blade and it's going to go through the lungs and you're going to get a traumatic pneumothorax, which is a collapsed lung. So basically, you're going to impact, it's going to go through. If you get hydrostatic shock, it's going to have the air leak out into that void. Now, that chest cavity has negative pressure. And once it's punctured, that's going to go away. But what's going to happen is that bullet's going to go in, it's going to puncture through, you're going to have a hole in the lungs, and you have that gap around the lungs inside that chest wall. And what's going to happen is it breathes, air is going to get on the outside and prevent those lungs from expanding. So every time it tries to breathe out, it's expanding air through into that chest cavity, and it's slowly crushing those lungs until they collapse. Now, if you achieve hydraulic shock, those lungs are going to be obliterated and they're basically going to blow up. So That's what's going to happen if you get that lower part. The temporary wound cavity, if it's large enough, is still going to shut down the CNS. It's going to hit that spot right on the shoulders in that spine where the brain signals go, that brainstem comes down to, and it disperses signals throughout the body. And so even with going on the lower side, you're still going to have a drop shot if you get good bullet performance. It's going to be dead right there. Now, if you're going through the upper part, you're going to actually impact that spine. You're going to impact where those signals to the brain go, and you're going to shut it down, dropping it dead on the spot. High shoulder is a phenomenal shot. It's one I preach. The one thing to watch is your impact velocity. If you're using a softer bullet, thinner jacket like, A-tips, etc., I recommend your high shoulder shots, under 26 to 2400 feet per second, depending on the projectile itself, the construction, and keep it below that, which isn't that hard. You don't need a whole lot of velocity to get good performance. Depending if you're running a solid, you can, go faster than that, but you really don't need it as far as if you're using a good projectile. Now, if you're using something that isn't an ideal bullet like the ones we talked about, the thick jacket, bonded bullets, you can do a high shoulder shot on higher velocities, and I actually recommend it just for the simple fact it's going to aid you in performance, increasing that impact resistance for you. So, those are your different shots. CNS is always the best. The easiest CNS to do is a high shoulder. If you get that opportunity, there's more margin for error. If you're a little bit off, guess what? You're still getting lungs. If you're off one way, you impact the neck, you still shut it down. It's a CNS shot. The other way, you still get lungs. Easy day, works phenomenal. In conclusion, there's a lot of misinformation out there coming from guys using bad bullets and trying to blame the cartridge or, bad shots, and they're trying to claim it was good shots, but it didn't perform, etc., etc. People have a tendency to blame everything except for themselves. But if you really want good performance, if you really want to put them down, not have to deal with the type of track jobs you're going to have to when you're going after a dangerous animal like a bear, pick a good bullet. Bullets are what matter. Realistically, the cartridge, all it does is give you velocity. That's it. Plain and simple. 308, 300, they both take the same bullet. Only difference is the velocity you can attain. So, quit focusing on the cartridge so much and just get a good bullet. You can do a lot more than what you think with that, what you quote unquote deer rifle. There's nothing on this planet you can't take down with the correct bullet. So, everybody, I hope this has helped. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below and I'll try to get to you. Everybody, I hope you had a good hunting season, whether it's still going, you're trapping, whatever you're doing, just being out in the outdoors. Good luck, be safe, happy hunting.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video. And happy hunting!